So I would like to say thank you everyone for coming to this breakout session. Just from the start, we aren't going to be talking about necessarily the science of climate change, nor the policies behind climate change. What this session is about sharing our stories, our lived experiences from the front lines of climate change. So with that, these are our frontline truths. We will be covering the Marshall Islands. We have Chris from the Marshall Islands, and then I'll be talking about Kiribati in this presentation.
All right, everybody. I appreciate just this opportunity to kind of speak with you all, and I'm glad to see some familiar names in the Zoom room. Honestly, I'm pretty nervous, as you can see. So I'm gonna go ahead and start off with a brief introduction of myself and kind of like how I got involved. So my name is Chris. I was born in the Marshall Islands, and I'm currently living in Springdale, Arkansas. For those who are unfamiliar with the islands, we're mostly commonly known for the location of the United States nuclear testing back in 1946 to 1958. And the most famous of them all was the Bravo shot that was tested in Bikini, the ancestral home of my father and his father. And until this day, many of our families cannot return home to the island being radiated, and just cannot sustain like the people back there. So, and that's just one group of people. And now with climate change, I can't fathom the idea of a whole nation of people, of my people, being displaced once again. Now many of us Marshallese and some of the descendants of those originally displaced and exiled have to find refuge and other forms of living in places like Springdale, which is home to one of the largest population of Marshallese in the States. So my introduction to climate change really started back in 2015 when I started seeing families and friends really talking about this issue and how it affects the islands and us. At the time, I thought those were just experts and scientists and politicians that were usually talking about this issue. At that point, I really didn't understand how that issue affected me, because I've been in the States so long that I felt so disconnected, and I was completely wrong. When a friend of mine said, we don't know the science and politics about this issue, but what we do see is in our own backyard, and that really resonated with me, because these were the backyards of a lot of my families and friends that over the summer I would go back home and stay with my grandparents, and these are the homes of those I love. So, and I asked my grandmother, who stays with me here in Springdale, like, what does she know about this issue? And surprisingly, she told me she didn't know anything. But what she knew was that there's a change that she can't describe, and she has seen loved ones' graves being washed away from rising sea level, but they don't know what's going on. They just see the water come, and it just takes their families. So, but yeah, that's my intro, and I'll go ahead and let Mike talk about himself.
Great, thank you, Chris. My name is Mike. I am an adopted son of the nation of Kiribati. I'm Native American, Mexican, biologically, but socially I'm a Pacific Islander. And what Chris was talking about is exactly what we have been talking about too. And we'll go a little bit further into it. But I thank everyone for being here, and let's continue. Next.
So right now we're gonna go through our points. So by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to learn about our natured atoll states, and you will understand our lived experience, and also understand why we don't want to leave the islands, and because they're not just islands, they're pretty much home to us.
So Anote Tong was the president of Kiribati prior to the current administration. And he said that climate change is the greatest moral challenge of the 21st century. And I added, it can't be relegated to silos of academic rigor or paradigms of economies or pursuits of scientific endeavors without first placing humanity at the center of everything. And I say this because you never hear about the human basis of climate change. You never hear the human side. You always hear the science, and in large part, the paradigm of climate change discussions has been dominated by the science. So we are not going to tell the science because that has been shown. We're going to tell the stories that you never hear. And these are the stories that we feel need to be heard. So Maria is a friend of mine from Kiribati, and this is her frontline truth. It was an essay that she wrote for a high school competition that she won. I didn't get the time to memorize it, so I will read it now. It's the frigate bird. The frigate bird is the national bird of Kiribati. It is the bird on our flag that flies over the rising and setting sun. The song of the frigate is one that my grandmother used to sing to me when I was little. It tells the story of how Kiribati's national bird and icon lost her home to the ocean after coming back from foraging. It was turned into a song in 1978, the year that I was born. She called out, "Rise up, Kiribati, hear my calling, hear my song. Where are you?" But the frigate bird never returned. It never found its nest. The story embodies the people of Kiribati and how we are singing our own songs for the world to hear, so they know that climate change is real and that it's really happening right now to our own homes. We are the frigate bird, and it's scary to acknowledge the fact that our nest will be one day washed away by the eventual waves that keep rising. When that day comes, that is when we as people will start losing our identity. We won't have the safety of our nest to keep family together because we'll be forced to leave one by one, to prematurely spread our wings and fly into an unfamiliar world that is not home. And bit by bit, we'll start losing our culture, our skills, our language, the things that define who we are as Kiribati people and who we have always been as Kiribati people. This is climate change. This is our reality. When Kiribati is gone, our future generations will never have the same feeling that we get when we think about home, because home will never be there. They'll never get the chance to experience the things that we only experience on the islands. They'll never get the chance to see that special spot where our president would stand every 12th of July on National Day. Or the simpler things, like the familiar ocean breeze when you're hanging out on the beach, outside of your house. They'll only know these things and hear about these things from other people or what's written in books. Kiribati will just be a memory. This is the reality, and I have accepted it. I have accepted that there will be a day in the near future when we won't ever see Kiribati, that tiny little dot on the map, again. I believe that climate change is real, and it's affecting my people, and I worry for my people. Speaking up and telling these frontline truths is not admitting that we are going to be gone forever, though it may seem that way. We are telling our story. We are not drowning. We are fighting. And by telling others, you are joining the fight. So Dr. Alex Hall of UCLA, Institute of Environment and Sustainability, made a speech one day back in 2010. And he said, "I think science is obviously very powerful and very necessary for climate change. But what we really need, what the bottleneck is putting a human face on it. People don't care about science, about facts of nature. Scientists care a lot about that stuff, but people don't, because people I don't think are really listening to the scientists. We need to have the world realize that climate change is important. And scientists aren't the ones to carry that message forward. It's people impacted by climate change. This is Christina Ramirez, and I do a lot of movie productions. And this is from one movie that's traveling the world film circuit right now, virtually, called One Word. And she sums it up very, very succinctly. I wish people would be more cooperative in how serious the climate issue is, instead of denying it as not real. So I said no science, but I have to put a little bit of science in there. We live on coral atolls, and these are atolls, they're remnants of ancient volcanic islands. Charles Darwin took a voyage in the 1800s and did some observations and came up with a theory, atoll development theory, stating that atolls begin as volcanic islands. They grow around that volcanic island to create a fringing reef. Eventually, that island, high island, subsides and the barrier reef forms. And then the final stage of the evolution for coral atolls would be the development of a coral atoll, where the barrier reef rises and creates a coral atoll while the high volcanic island sinks down below the surface of the sea level. Those fringing reefs are what we live on today. They need a certain salinity, they need a certain light, they need a certain temperature in order to stay living. Right now, the Great Barrier Reef has, for all intents and purposes, been dead. We see the coral bleaching in our own islands, and we see our environments dying because of the oceanic acidification, because of the higher temperatures of the water, because of the bigger storms, because of the prolonged droughts, because of the rainy seasons that don't stop. This is our reality. Chris, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay. Yeah. As Mike was describing how a coral atoll looks like, I mean, from the left side you could see the Marshall, Majuro is pretty much the capital. So like, where my grandmother lives, you could literally see, the lagoon side to the ocean, and so when a wave would come in, it'll reach the other side, in an instant. But as a kid, or as somebody that living on the islands, that it's not like a reason for us to be scared, because we've always been living in these these stretch of lands, because we know that, like, that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us, because a place full of water, pieces of land is sacred. So it's unique. So having that understanding, it does give us a sense of why so many of my families and friends want to stay and don't really want to leave, because they don't know anything else beside home. So they're used to seeing water from both sides. So just, I often hear people say, why can't they just up and leave if they know what's going to happen? I mean, you can't. It's just the idea of like leaving your home is unfathomable, and it's almost any human could understand that fact. So it's just the love of home is a good enough reason to fight for what's ours. Do you want to go ahead and talk about Kiribati? My,
Sure, I'll go on and continue with that train of thought. The idea of land for Kiribati is there's a cosmological connection between the past, the present, and the future for people who live in Kiribati. There's a direct link between the people and the land, so much of a link that we have the word Abba, which stands for, if you throw it into religious terminology, it's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Trinity. It's land, people, community. Without the land, there is no life. Um, when you are born in Kiribati, you are born on your land. And this is land that has been handed down for thousands of generations. There are archaeological findings and research on what we call lapida pottery that goes back and traces the peopling of the Pacific to 10,000 years ago. Way before, Europeans decided that the world was round. We were traveling around in our canoes and peopling the Pacific. Um, so when you are born on your land, you live on your land, you grow up on your land, you have children of your own on that land. You grow old, have grandchildren, great grandchildren, maybe even, and then you return to that land to join the ancestors who watch over the land for future generations. When we talk about land, we're talking about identity, we're talking about personhood, because that land is the caretaker, and you are the caretaker, and it is your responsibility to continue on what your ancestors have provided for you. The loss of land, though, when we talk about loss of land, we're really talking about ecological genocide that climate change has caused on everyone that lives in these atolls. So how many nations are there that are impacted by this? Directly, there are Marshall Islands, Maldives, Tuvalu, Tokelau, and Kiribati. There's 5 coral atoll nations completely made up of coral atolls in the world today. Not a lot of people, not even 1 million people. We're looking at 750,000 possibly today. So we're not that important because we don't have the population, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources. We cannot force political will. But we are the canaries in the climate change coal mine that everyone has never heard of, but they need to, because we have experienced what everyone is trying to fight against experiencing. Where are these nations? Well, they're in the Pacific, of course, and then we also have the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. If you notice, they're all pretty much around the equator. You have the Marshall Islands, where Chris is speaking on, Kiribati, where I'm speaking on, then Tuvalu, Tokelau, and the Maldives. So they are all pretty much in the same area of the world, the equatorial Pacific, or the equatorial regions of the world. So this is why I was talking about the ecological genocide. When I talk to elders in the villages, they always say exactly what this Unamane, or elder of the village, told me. I love my land. If it is going to go, I will go with it. In 2005, this is from my village, we had a house in the village that was flooded by a king tide. Now, king tides happen maybe 4 times a year. It's when the moon directly aligns to make the tides extremely high, and typically they wash over the entire island. Same area, same location in 2008, same area, same location in 2011, same area and location in 2015. So for us, climate change is not something that will happen or may happen in the future. Climate change is something that has already devastated my family and has already devastated our country, and Chris's as well. The IPCC made a report way back in 2000, and it was COP13 Copenhagen. 2030, they predicted that the southern portion of Tarawa would be flooded. 2050, a little bit more. 2070, a little bit more. And then 2100, we would have a lot of the island flooded. Today, we are at 2,100 predictions. So obviously, What had been predicted happened 100 years way too fast. Population health and deteriorating environments. What happens when the ocean washes over your land? Well, you get flooded. What happens when there's prolonged drought because of La Nina, El Nino seasons, unsustainable agriculture environments? The water gets salinated by the ocean. We get our water from digging into the ground. The coral atoll creates a natural filtration system that allows us to get fresh water. The fresh water gets depleted. Sometimes it causes big erosion. So it destroys our land, it destroys our food, and it destroys our water. Salinated water kills. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is from my well back home. This water is what we have to survive on. And this water has killed people in my own family and friends with little children. So to us, climate change is not about a bill. Climate change is about survival.
Yeah, and I hope if I'm not from Kiribati, if I'm from other country, big country, I might feel the same, feel the Kiribati people's sadness. I might feel it, and I might do something. But I'm very unlucky to be a Kiribati people because I have many ideas, but I have no way to.
We wish they really see us suffer. We are.
Yeah, they are suffer.
I was one of the person working behind the scene to prepare the team that go to Copenhagen for the COP15. We are very grateful with the outcome of what happens after the COP15, and that promotes Kiribati as one of the advocates and supporter of the idea of this climate change, because people don't like it, because they don't want Kiribati to disappear, so they don't want to accept it. But whether we like it or not, we cannot bring ourselves to the future, to the time when Kiribati will be underwater. So I think what we had done, government has done, is very good. We don't want to be irrelevant. We don't want to be left out.
So the idea of a climate refugee is great and all, but it's not a real thing. Under the 1951 and 1967 protocol, a refugee is someone who belongs to a certain group, a political group, a persecuted religious group, someone who belongs to certain categories. Being an environmental refugee or a climate refugee is not something that is legally defined. And no matter how many times you hear climate refugee, it is not a real thing.
I'm coming to meet you. I'm coming to see you. What stories will I find? Will I find an island or a tomb? To get to this tomb, take a canoe. Take a canoe through miles of scattered sun. Swallow endless, swirling sea. Gulp down radioactive lagoon. Do not bring flowers or speeches. There will be no white stones to scatter along this grave. There will be no songs to sing. How shall we remember you? You were a whole island once. You were breadfruit trees, heavy with green globes of fruit, whispering promises of massive canoes. Crabs dusted with white sand scuttled through pandanus roots. Beneath looming coconut trees, beds of watermelons slept still, swollen with juice. And you were protected by powerful Iroij chiefs birthed from women who could swim pregnant for miles beneath a full moon. Then you became testing ground. 9 nuclear weapons consumed you one by one by one, engulfed in an inferno of blazing heat. You became crater, an empty belly. Plutonium ground into a concrete slurry filled your hollow caverns. You became tomb. You became concrete shell. You became solidified history. Immovable, unforgettable. You were a whole island once. Who remembers you beyond your death? Who would have us forget that you were once green globes of fruit, pandanus roots, and whispers of canoes? Who knows the stories of the life you led before? Here is a story of a turtle goddess. She gifted one of her sons, Leda, a piece of her shell anointed with power, a leathery green fragment, hollow as a piece of water. It gave Leda the power to transform into anything, into houses and trees, the shapes of other men, even kindling for the first fire. He almost burned us alive. I am looking for more stories. I look and I look. There must be more to this than incinerated trees, a cracked dome, a rising sea, a leaking nuclear waste with no fence. There must be more to this than a concrete shell that houses death. Here's the story of another shell, anointed with power. Leodao used it to transform into kindling for the first fire. He gave this fire to a small boy. The boy almost burned his entire village to the ground. Licks of fire leapt from skin and bones, from strands of coconut leaves. While the boy cried, Leodao laughed. This is a story of a people on fire. We pretend it is not burning all of us. Here is the story of the ways we've been tricked, the lies we've been fed. It's not poisonous anymore. Your illnesses are normal. You're fine. You're fine. My belly is a crater empty of stories and answers. Only questions, hard as concrete. Who gave them this power? Who anointed them with the power to burn?
climate change, as you can see, is our new nuclear bomb. But we have hope. We have hope. To solve climate change, we need a fee, yeah. But don't forget about the millions already living compromised lives. Last year, I was able to meet with the officers of Senator Markey and Representative Velasquez, Massachusetts and New York. They both put forward last year bills, tandem bills, that would allow for the thought of accepting quote unquote climate change refugees from countries that no longer are able to sustain their populations. It has not really gone anywhere other than an introduction. In the Senate, it has been passed on to foreign affairs, foreign relations, but it hasn't gone anywhere beyond that. This is the bill that I think impacts us on the front lines the most, because HR 763 will take a long time for impacts to reach our nations. So in your groups, you will be assigned to virtual discussion groups of 5 participants or around 5. We want you to introduce yourselves to each other, and then each participant, please share with you which of the options you would vote for and why. The participant whose name is first in alphabetical order, please facilitate the group and make sure everyone gets to contribute. Please make sure initial contributions are a minute or less, so you have few additional minutes to discuss. When you return, we will re-poll on the same 4 options. So right now, if you could poll which option you would choose. Support passage of the bill, support of the displaced persons bill, support aggressive mitigation, support global push for legal refugee, I can't see what's behind that, or support lands abroad and immigration services for at-risk populations. So right now, support aggressive mitigation in the US and other countries to contain global warming to US 1.5 Celsius degrees. Okay, so we'll go into your breakouts and discuss the 4 options, and we'll be back here in maybe 5 minutes. Okay. Well, it's a little bit more even. Last time, I think it was the support aggressive mitigation in the US and other countries to contain it to 1.5. And now it kind of looks like we got the Markey bill and immigration services for at-risk population and lands abroad. So I think in my group, we kind of discussed the fact that all of them need to be implemented for island nations, endangered island nations, vanishing states. Great, okay. So to wrap up and get everybody back in time, I just want to announce a couple of things that are going to be going on. July 12th is Independence Day for the nation of Kiribati, and the Peace Corps Action Team with CCL is going to be hosting a virtual screening of Anote's Arc. We had shown it at the November conference 2019, and that's a movie about climate change in Kiribati and what has happened over years of time. And then 2021, they will host One Word, another documentary that I helped out with. It focuses on the Marshall Islands, and it's a participatory-based documentary by people from the Marshall Islands. And it's a very, very good documentary. I think the next stop we have it in is the Japanese Film Festival, Environmental Film Festival, coming up here really soon. I would like to thank everyone for joining us, hearing our stories, and I believe that if the climate can change, so can we, and for our sake and the planet's sake, so must we. Kambasa na pa kami, bukan amtay, and the pong ayo. And Chris, do you want to say any final words?
Yeah, I just wanted to just say I really appreciate everyone in this room and your interest in continuing the fight. Because me personally, you know, it does feel like seeing so many of these faces like involved. It does reinforce the fact that there are people listening, like to us as well. Even for myself, you know, I was losing all hope as soon as I really started to understand what's going on. But I know that, you know, leaving the islands is not the last for us, or like the only outcome, but it's just kind of continuing the culture and the money and the people by just the stories and the support system globally. So just want to say kumotata, and I'll see you all soon.
Well, thank you very much, Mike and Chris, for sharing your stories and the stories of your homes. I think it's time, everyone, to head back to the main room. The chat link is you'll see it from the Impact Project admin is where it's coming from. So you can go there. If you have any questions about tech, just message the chat and I'll do my best to put you where you need to go.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Chris and Mike.
I appreciate you, fella.